My name is Gian. That is the first thing I knew when I opened my eyes in a world that was not my own. The house around me was barely standing, walls cracked, roof sagging, floorboards rotting through in patches. Weak morning light crept in through gaps in the shutters and landed on nothing of value, because there was nothing of value to land on. I lay still for a moment, taking stock of what I knew and what I had become. Back on Earth, I had been a delivery driver. The last thing I remembered was the screech of tires and the blunt, enormous impact of a Porsche that had apparently not noticed me. Now I was here, in the Great Qin Empire, in the hollow shell of a life that belonged to a young man named Gian. A failed scholar. No parentes, no fiancé, no food, no prospects. The villagers, from what I could gather through the fog of inherited memory, had essentially stopped acknowledging his existence. They were simply waiting, with the patient cruelty of people who have nothing else to do, for him to die so they could take the house. I had barely finished assessing my miserable circumstances when the banging started. It was not a polite knock. It was the kind of pounding that rattles the door in its frame and suggests that refusal is not a serious option. Outside, officers in dusty uniforms were working their way down the village road, shouting the announcement with the flat efficiency of men who had said the same words many times that day. Wife selection. All unmarried men were required to participate. The available women were war widows, those left behind when their husbands died fighting. Every man present would choose, or be conscripted to the front lines instead. The villagers around me stirred with cautious excitement, the way people do when they sense something unusual is about to happen. That excitement curdled quickly when the officers announced the cost. 50 Gian of grain per wife, every month, without exception. The muttering started immediately. 50 Gian was not a small amount. For most of the men gathered there, it was more grain than they could reliably produce in that time. The mood in the crowd deflated like a punctured bladder. I was calculating my own odds, which were poor, when the voice appeared in my head. Not a hallucination, not a dream. A system, clean and precise, projecting information directly into my mind with the calm confidence of something that has always been there and was simply waiting to be noticed. 3 names appeared before me, each accompanied by a set of numbers I understood immediately to be favorability ratings. Xiaovania, Royal Princess. Favorability, low. Gujian, Rebel General. Favorability, low. Zhu Jingqing, Disowned Noble. Favorability, low. Below each name, the system outlined what it offered. Rewards tied to favorability increases, compounding as trust grew. It was not a complicated proposal. Work to earn their trust, and the system would work for me in return. I did not deliberate for long. When the officers moved down the line and reached me, I pointed to all 3. The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens when a crowd cannot decide whether to laugh or stare. They settled on both. I heard Sun Hao's voice cutting through the noise, a cousin of the original Gian, a man with a pockmarked face and a long-standing habit of contempt, announcing to anyone who would listen that I had no grain, no food, and no future, and that 3 wives would finish me faster than 1. He found this very funny. I ignored him. I had seen the panel. I knew something he did not. The selection concluded and the officers moved on. I looked at the 3 women who were now, by the laws of the Great Qin Empire, my wives. None of them looked pleased. All 3 of them, for different reasons and from different heights of former status, had ended up here, and I was not what any of them had been hoping for. But they followed me home. I counted that as a start. The house, seen through their eyes, was worse than I had grown used to it in the few hours I had been conscious inside it. I watched them take in the crumbling walls, the absence of furniture, the single tired bed in the corner, and I felt the particular embarrassment of being responsible for a situation you did not create. I apologized. It was the honest thing to do. Chu Qingqing surprised me. She smiled, genuinely, without any edge of performance, and said she was grateful. Whatever had been waiting for her before this election, it was worse than a broken-down house with a peculiar husband. I felt the system register the shift before I fully processed it myself. 5 points of favorability accumulated just from that exchange. She was warm and courteous by nature. I could see that already. Zhao Waner and Gu Jian were quieter, more guarded, but neither was unkind. They had simply learned not to extend trust before it was earned. That was reasonable. I intended to earn it. What broke the careful silence of the afternoon was a sound from Zhao Waner's stomach, the blunt, inarguable announcement that no one in this house had eaten. I checked the kitchen. It confirmed what I already suspected. There was nothing. I turned to the system instead, pulled up my interface, and discovered that Chu Chinking's favorability had crossed 10 points. I claimed the reward without hesitation. Instant noodles appeared, along with rice and cooking oil. I built a fire and cooked. The smell alone changed the atmosphere in the room. When I set the bowls in front of them, all three women stared at the noodles with the expression of people who had been braced for boiled grass and received something they couldn't immediately classify. Zhao Waner, a royal princess, a woman who had presumably eaten at tables I could not imagine, took one bite, then another, and quietly admitted it was very good. I watched the tension in the room ease slightly, like a rope given a little slack. Their favorability began to climb. Later, when it came time to sleep, the arithmetic of one bed and 4 people presented itself as a problem with no elegant solution. I was still working through it when Zhao Waner resolved the question by claiming the bed with the decisive calm of someone who has never seriously considered sleeping on the floor. Gu Jian took the floor without complaint, settling against the wall like a soldier on campaign, which I suppose she essentially was. Chu Qingqing hesitated, a flush creeping in her cheeks, and then the whole question was interrupted by someone hammering on the front door. I opened it to find Sun Hao. He was carrying moldy rice, holding it out with the theatrical generosity of a man who considers himself a benefactor. He talked around his actual request for a few minutes before stating it plainly. He wanted to trade the grain for a night with one of my wives. Specifically, he indicated the one with the fuller figure. I looked at him for a moment. Then I told him exactly what I thought of his offer and pushed him back through the doorway. He did not take this well. He grabbed a stick from somewhere and raised it over his head, and then Gu Jian appeared from behind the interior door, one hand catching his wrist before the swing could complete. She had been listening the entire time. She held him immobile with the casual competence of someone who has disarmed people before and found it unremarkable. Sun Hao, dangling from her grip, switched tactics and began mocking me for hiding behind a woman. I stepped forward. "Women are equal to men," I said. "Protecting each other is simply what people who share a household do." I was not certain where the words came from exactly, some mixture of my own instincts and the genuine conviction I felt saying them. But I meant it, and I noticed Gu Jian's expression shift, almost imperceptibly as I said it. The system confirmed 2 favorability points gained. I told her to release him. Sun Hao stumbled and went down on one knee, scrabbling to recover his dignity. He threatened, before leaving, that his brother was a county officer and that this was not finished. Then he fled at a speed that contradicted his confident tone. Inside, my wives were quiet for a moment. Zhao Waner said something in the process of being angry that confirmed what I had begun to suspect, that her background was not what it appeared on the surface. Gu Jian noticed it too, I could tell. Chu Qingqing worried aloud that Sun Hao would come back with worse intentions. I reassured them and meant it. Then I laid out my bedding on the floor, settled down, and stared at the ceiling in the dark, thinking about 3 beautiful women and the considerable patience this situation was going to require. Sometime deep in the night, warmth arrived beside me. Chu Qingqing had come down from the bed and curled against my side, her face pink and her eyes not quite meeting mine. She said she understood it was still our wedding night. She was not ready for everything yet, but she did not want to spend it entirely apart, either. I was moved. I told her that when the time came, I would give her a wedding night worthy of the name. She told me about her family, then, in the particular hushed way of someone who has been carrying a story without anyone to give it to. A silk merchant family from Jiangnan, prosperous and honest. Corrupt officials had wanted a share of what they built, and, when refused, had fabricated charges and destroyed them. Every member of her family killed, and Chu Qingqing left alone to whatever came after. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I made her a promise. I would make those people answer for it. On the other side of the room, Gian turned over quietly. I did not catch what she said, if she said anything, but something in the quality of her silence told me she was not asleep. The next trouble came with morning. A man was at the door before I was fully awake, shouting that my family's ox was dead. It took a moment to sort through Gian's inherited memories and understand what he meant. The plow ox had been lent to old Jiang to help work his fields. It was the last asset of any practical value that I owned. Old Jiang was panicked and apologetic when I found him. He stumbled through an explanation. Somehow had accused the ox of charging him and stabbed it through the heart. The accusation was plainly a fabrication. The revenge was obviously deliberate. I stood there for a moment and let the anger settle into something useful. The old Gian would have absorbed this quietly. He would have looked at Sun Hao's brother, Sun Hu, county officer, a man known for settling arguments with his fists and his authority, and concluded that the sensible choice was silence. I was not the old Gian. Old Jiang warned me. Sun Hu and Sun Hao were together, he said. Sun Hu was not a man who responded well to being challenged. I accessed the system while he was still speaking and spent a draw on a strength enhancement. The result landed immediately. A technique called backhand fist and 18 additional points of raw physical strength. I felt the change move through my body like current through a wire. Muscles reshaping, reflexes sharpening, a new solidity in my bones that had not been there before. I picked up a sickle and left. Zhao Wanner watched me go from the doorway, something unreadable in her expression. Behind me, without my noticing until later, Gujian slipped out of the house and followed at a distance. I found them exactly as I expected, lounging around a fire, the ox already reduced to something being divided between 7 or 8 men in uniform. They were eating and laughing and passing a jug between them, and none of them looked up when I arrived because none of them were accustomed to being confronted. I called Sun Hao's name. He looked up, recognized me, and broke into a grin. He grabbed a heavy bench from somewhere nearby and came at me with the confidence of a man who has settled disputes this way before and won them all. I did not step back. I kicked him in the chest. He left the ground. He came back down several feet from where he had started, coughing up blood, making sounds that were not consistent with his earlier confidence. The men around the fire went absolutely still. Sun Hu rose slowly from his chair. I watched his face cycle through disbelief and arrive at fury. The scholar Gian, the weak, cowardly, broke scholar Gian, had just put his brother on the ground in front of witnesses. Sun Hao was screaming from the dirt, demanding that his brother act. Sun Hu picked up a thick stick and told me he would break both my legs. I looked at him evenly. Your brother killed a plow ox, I said. Under the laws of the Dian Empire, that is a capital offense. You, as head constable, not only failed to punish him, you helped consume the evidence. The penalty for that is doubled. You may break my legs today, but every official standing here will eventually face the executioner. The men around the fire exchanged glances. I was not wrong, and they knew it. A plow ox was not just property. It was food production in a country already stretched to its limits by war and famine. The laws on this were explicit and were not being enforced loosely. Sun Hu waved it off. I was a broke scholar who couldn't afford proper paper to write a complaint on. They outnumbered me. He told them to move in together, take out my tongue, and leave me alive, and I would have nothing to threaten them with afterward. I would advise against that, I said, considering that I informed several villagers before I left. They should be arriving shortly to observe. This was a lie. I had left too quickly to tell anyone anything, and no one would walk toward the sound of armed officials in the dark without a very good reason. But they did not know that, and the possibility of being caught with a dead ox, a bleeding suspect, and a crowd of witnesses was enough. Sun Hu's nerve broke. He ordered his men to take Sun Hao and go, promising me, over his shoulder, that this was not finished. I watched them leave in a disorganized retreat and shook my head slowly. The ox was already cooked. Letting good meat go to waste seemed like poor economics. I sat down and began to eat. A few minutes later, Zhao Wanner and Gujian emerged from the shadows at the edge of the firelight, looking at me with expressions I could not immediately classify. I looked up at them. Two ladies. Come eat before it gets cold. Save some for Chu Ching Ching. They looked at each other, then at me, and came and sat down without another word. We ate together in the dark, the three of us, in the middle of a field that smelled of wood smoke and cooling night air. I noticed, watching them, that something in each of them had loosened slightly. Gian ate with the focused appreciation of someone who has been hungry long enough that a full meal is not a small thing. Zhao Wanner, who I suspected had not eaten meat in weeks, said nothing at all, but did not stop until the bowl was empty. On the way home, she finally asked, "What exactly are you?" I considered the question. "Your husband," I said. The system chimed in my head. Zhao Wanner's favorability had crossed 20. So had Gujian's. 4 lottery draws arrived in the same moment, and I made a quiet note to use them carefully. Back at the house, Chu Qingqing met us at the door, her hands clasped together, her eyes moving over me in rapid assessment. When she was satisfied that I was uninjured, the anxiety broke open into something more complicated, admiration and worry occupying the same expression. She listened to the full account and then told me plainly, with the reasonableness of someone who has thought carefully about danger, that common people do not win against officials in the long run. Offending Sun Hu and Sun Hao was not a small thing. They had many tools at their disposal. She was not wrong. I acknowledged it. Zhao Wanner asked what I planned to do when the grain tax came due. 3 wives meant 150 Gene per month, and we had nothing close to that. I smiled. I will pay 6 months at once. The 3 of them stared at me, and we will have meat at every meal from this point forward. The silence that followed had a different quality from the usual kind. It was not disbelief, exactly. They had watched what happened tonight, and something in all 3 of them had shifted. But 6 months of grain at once, plus meat daily, coming from a man who had possessed nothing 24 hours ago, was a large promise. Zhao Wanner's voice was softer than it had been before. "What are you planning?" I put a finger to my lips and smiled. "The mountain folk have their methods. Sleep now. I will explain in the morning." I laid out my bedding, wished them good night, and was asleep within minutes. The 3 of them lay awake for a long time. Deep in the night, the system woke me twice with notifications. Chu Chinking's favorability had crossed 30. The combined total across all 3 women had crossed 70. Rewards were queued and waiting. I lay in the dark, groggy, and found Chu Qingqing kneeling beside me, tucking a blanket carefully around my shoulders. She did not know I was watching. I reached up and put my arm around her waist. She startled, made a soft sound, and leaned forward. And for a moment we were very close, and the night was warm, and the situation required considerable self-restraint. I kissed her cheek gently and told her to go back to sleep. She nodded, not quite meeting my eyes, and returned to the bed. I wrapped the blanket around myself and stood in the courtyard, breathing the cold air and opening the rewards I had accumulated. 10 arbitrary attribute points went directly into strength, pushing my stat to 68, close to the upper limit of ordinary human capacity. I could feel the difference already. Then I opened the intermediate gift pack. 20 upgraded antibiotics, 10 high-quality, new energy fishing rods, 5 infrared, semi-automatic compound bows with 100 arrows, 10 upgraded adrenaline injectors, and 100 super potatoes. I stood very still for a moment, reading the descriptions. The fishing rods were electric, no hooks, no nets, no skill required. Walk to any body of water, activate, and collect the results. The compound bows had built-in infrared targeting and 100-meter effective range. Prey would not hear me coming and would not be able to identify the source in time. And the potatoes, cold-resistant, drought-resistant, no seasonal limitations, rapid reproduction, 30-day maturation cycle. In a country where people were starving, where the fields had been stripped and the forests hunted thin, where grain was the difference between life and conscription, I was holding the solution in the palm of my hand. I laughed quietly into the dark, alone in the broken courtyard of my broken house. By tomorrow evening, we would have fish. Within a month, we would have a harvest. The grain tax was not a problem. Sun Hao and his brother were not a problem. The war, the famine, the enemies both known and approaching. These were problems I would solve one at a time, with the patience of someone who has already died once and knows that a second chance is not something to be squandered. Morning came with the sound of arguing. I opened my eyes to find Chu Qingqing clutching a bag of instant noodles to her chest and refusing to surrender it to Zhao Wanner, who wanted to cook more than Chu Qingqing considered prudent. They were conducting this disagreement in intense whispers so as not to wake me, which I found genuinely touching. Gian stood between them, attempting mediation with the expression of someone who has managed soldiers and finds domestic arguments unexpectedly difficult. I got up, took the noodles from Chu Qingqing, and handed them to Gian. 3 meals a day from now on, I said. 2 packets per person. Add the full seasoning packet. I looked at Chu Qingqing's worried face and put my hand briefly on her shoulder. Trust me, this is not the last of what we have. She nodded, though I could see it cost her something to suppress the instinct for caution that had carried her this far. When we had eaten, I told them my plan for the food problem. Fishing and hunting, I said. The 3 of them exchanged a look that contained several layers of polite skepticism. The rivers and forests around Hongnon County had been picked over by everyone desperate enough to try. Experienced hunters came back empty-handed, and I had no rod, no bow, no net, no tools, and, as far as they could see, no relevant skills. Zhao Wanner looked at me steadily. What exactly are you planning to hunt with? I smiled and reached into the system inventory. Let me show you.